A lightning bolt struck the coffin. The sound was loud and sharp. Sparks flew, and smoke curled into the air. Everyone around it stopped moving, their eyes locked on the scene. No one knew that something truly shocking was only minutes away. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you are watching from. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have a special story for you. Carol was a 50-year-old woman who lived alone on a small piece of land outside the village. Her house was simple, made of wood, with a small front porch and a vegetable garden in the back. She didn't have a big family living with her. Most of her days were spent working on her farm, tending to her animals, and taking care of her crops. Her life was quiet but steady. She liked the silence, the open skies, and the smell of fresh soil in the morning. Her dog, Max, was her only companion. He had been with her for 10 years. He followed her everywhere, through the fields to the barn, and even sat next to her on the porch in the evenings. They shared every meal. Carol would talk to him like he was family. Max listened. His ears would perk up, and he would rest his head on her lap. They understood each other without saying a word. Carol's days began before the sun was up. She fed the chickens, milked the goat, and walked with Max along the edges of her property. She planted new seeds when the season came, pulled weeds, and fixed old fences. When the sun got too hot, she rested under the tree by the barn. Her hands were always rough in the work, but she never complained. She felt at peace in the routine. The villagers knew her as a kind and quiet woman. She wasn't at every event, but when someone needed help, she showed up. She once helped a neighbor rebuild a shed after a storm, and another time, she cared for a sick cow that wasn't even hers. People respected her. She was not rich, not loud, but she was steady. One morning, everything changed. Carol had just poured food into Max's bowl. She turned to reach for the water bucket, but her hand froze midair. Her chest tightened. Her knees gave way. She collapsed to the floor before she could make a sound. Max barked loudly and ran to her. He nudged her shoulder and pawed at her arm. She didn't move. He howled, a deep, desperate sound that echoed across the field. The sky was clear. The birds kept singing. But inside the little house, time had stopped. Max paced back and forth. He licked her face and barked again, louder this time. When no one came, he lay down next to her, his body pressed close. He stayed that way for hours, not eating, not moving, just watching. By the time someone noticed Carol had not come into town, it was already too late. A neighbor came to check. When they opened the door, Max growled at first, not wanting anyone near her. But when he saw it was someone familiar, he stepped back. His eyes stayed on Carol's still body. The neighbor called for help, but there was nothing that could be done. The doctor came and said it had been a heart attack. It had happened fast. They took Carol away. Max sat by the door after they left, waiting for her to return. But she didn't. The house felt colder, quieter, and empty without her footsteps. Max didn't understand. He only knew she was gone. Word of Carol's passing spread quickly through the village. Many people were shocked. Some had just spoken to her the day before. Others remembered how she always helped when asked, never expecting anything in return. Her quiet presence had always been there, like the sound of the wind through the trees, always felt, even if not always seen. Now she was gone, and the village felt different. Preparation for her funeral began the same day. The local undertaker took her body to the small funeral home. The women in the village gathered to help clean her house and collect some of her personal items. They folded her clothes, washed the dishes, and swept the floor. Everything was done with quiet hands and heavy hearts. Some neighbors brought flowers. Others offered food. A few simply stood in silence outside her gate, unsure what to say. Carol had no children, no husband, but she had her grandmother, Gina, who had raised her when she was young. Gina was now older, her hands slower, her back more bent. She had not seen Carol in weeks. When the news reached her, she sat down and didn't speak for hours. She stared at the floor, her face pale, her eyes empty. The village church agreed to host the service. A wooden coffin was chosen, simple and clean. A few photos were placed near it. Carol as a young girl, Carol with Max, Carol standing proudly by her garden. The service was set for the next day. Meanwhile, Max was not the same. Since Carol's body had been taken, he had grown restless. He did not sleep much. He wandered around the house, sniffing her favorite chair, waiting by the door. He barked at odd hours. He paced back and forth, whining at nothing. When someone came to feed him, he ate little and returned to the porch to lie down. His ears twitched at every sound, as if expecting Carol's footsteps. When the day of the funeral arrived, Max refused to stay inside. As people gathered outside the house to follow the coffin to the cemetery, Max tried to jump into the van, carrying it. He barked loudly and jumped at the back doors. People tried to pull him away. They gave him food and tried to distract him, but Max would not calm down. His eyes were wide and his body tense. It was clear he was not just sad. He was trying to say something, but no one knew what. Gina arrived with help from a neighbor. She wore a black coat and held a small cloth in her hand. Her eyes were red. She walked slowly toward the house, looking around as if in a dream. When she saw the coffin, she stopped. Her mouth trembled. She did not speak. She placed her hand on the wood and stood still. Someone touched her shoulder gently, but she did not move. People began walking to the cemetery. Max followed close behind, his tail low, his ears back. Every few steps, he barked again. The barking was not loud, but it was sharp. It made people turn and look. Some said he was just grieving. Others said he had always been a loyal dog, but no one could explain why he looked so desperate. At the cemetery gate, Max refused to stay outside. He pushed through people's legs and ran toward the grave. When they placed the coffin near the hole, Max circled it again and again. He scratched the ground. He whined. His body shook. The villagers tried to pull him back, but he growled and pulled away. It took two people to hold him still. They tied Max to a tree nearby. He kept barking. His eyes stayed fixed on the coffin. He did not blink much. He did not give up. The wind began to pick up. The sky was gray. People gathered around the grave, holding flowers, tissues, or each other. The pastor opened his book and began to read. Gina stood at the front, her face down, her hands clasped. Max barked again. He did not stop. His body pulled hard against the leash. His feet scratched at the dirt. His eyes stayed fixed on the wooden coffin, resting above the grave. It was as if he was trying to warn someone or stop something. The pastor continued the service. His voice was low and steady, but many people kept glancing over at Max. Some were annoyed. Others looked nervous. A few whispered among themselves. But no one moved to untie the dog. They wanted the funeral to go on, without more noise. As the pastor read from his book, the wind picked up. It blew stronger, pushing umbrellas to one side. Some people grabbed their coats tighter. The rain grew heavier. A deep rumble echoed across the sky. Everyone looked up. Thick clouds had rolled in fast, covering the sun completely. The cemetery, once peaceful, now looked dark and uneasy. Max's barking grew louder. He howled between barks, his voice sharp and wild. His body twisted, trying to free himself from the leash. His feet dug into the wet ground, but the tree held firm. His fur was soaked, but he did not stop. The workers stepped forward to lower the coffin. The ropes tightened as the wooden box slowly sank into the ground. The moment felt still, but the storm above had grown stronger. The sky flashed with light. A loud crack followed, sharper than before. Then it happened. A bolt of lightning shot down from the sky. It struck the coffin with a blinding flash. The sound was deafening. A loud crack exploded through the air, and the ground shook slightly beneath their feet. The lightning hit so fast that most people could not react in time. The light lit up every face. The sound hit every chest. People screamed. Some dropped their umbrellas. Others turned and ran. Shoes slipped in the mud as bodies pushed away from a grave. A few fell to the ground. The smell of burnt air filled the space. The sudden heat left a strange sting in the air. A white cloud of smoke rose where the lightning had struck. Max had stopped barking for a second. Then he barked again, louder than before. His whole body leaned forward. His leash stretched tight and his legs shook. He barked again and again, louder, sharper, almost panicked. The tree he was tied to stood tall, but the grass around it was scorched. People looked around, unsure what to do. Some stared at the smoking coffin. Others kept their eyes on Max. The pastor dropped his book. A woman nearby began to cry. Another man held his chest, trying to calm his breathing. No one could believe what had just happened. A bolt of lightning had come out of the sky and struck the coffin. Not a tree, not the ground, just the coffin. And it had happened right in front of them. The wind grew quiet for a moment. The storm had paused, but the people could not move. They stood frozen, their eyes locked on the grave. Max's voice cut through the stillness. He had not stopped barking. He pulled hard at his leash, his body tense, his eyes wild. Rain ran down his fur, but he didn't care. His head was high, his voice full of something deeper than fear. No one spoke. No one moved closer. All eyes remained on the coffin, still smoking slightly, resting at the bottom of the open grave. The storm had left its mark, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before. In the stillness, a faint sound came. It was soft, almost hidden. At first, no one noticed it. Then it came again, quiet like a light tap on wood. Some thought it was just the wind brushing the trees. But the sound repeated, this time a little louder. It came from the direction of the coffin. Gina stood near the edge of the grave. Her eyes were locked on the smoke below. Her hands hung at her sides, wet from rain. She was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling. When the soft tapping sound came again, she tilted her head. She did not move, but her face changed. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes widened. She had heard something. It had come from inside the coffin. The others were still in shock. Some were slowly stepping forward again. Others looked around, unsure whether to speak or leave. No one wanted to be the first to say anything. The storm had scared them. But now something else filled the air, an odd feeling that something was not right. The sound came again. It was still soft but clear, a gentle knock, like something small brushing the lid of the wooden box. This time more people heard it. Heads turned, eyes widened. A few took small steps back. No one said a word. They just stared at the coffin. The funeral director stood nearby. He had dropped his umbrella when the lightning struck. His hands were shaking. His clothes were soaked. He stepped closer to the edge, careful not to slip in the mud. His eyes were fixed on the coffin. The tapping sound grew louder. Now it was not just a tap. It was a steady, light thump, as if something was moving just beneath the lid. No one dared to move. Every step felt heavy. The rain had almost stopped, but the sound from the coffin had taken its place. The silence around it made the noise seem louder. It echoed in the air, each thump sharper than the last. The funeral director climbed down slowly into the grave. The rope that had lowered the coffin still hung beside it. He stepped carefully on the muddy floor, then reached the box. His fingers hovered over the lid. His breath was shaky. His heart was pounding. Everyone above held their breath. The lid moved slightly. A soft creak broke through the stillness. The director jumped back, startled, but did not leave. He looked up at the people watching from above. Their faces were pale. Their eyes were wide. One woman covered her mouth. Another held on to her husband's arm. The coffin lid moved again. This time, it lifted just a little, barely an inch. A tiny gap formed at the edge. The sound had stopped. Everything was still again. The director waited, his eyes locked on the opening. He took a slow step forward and placed his hand on the wood. With one smooth motion, he lifted the lid all the way open. A deep gasp spread to the crowd. Some people stepped back. Others leaned in. Rainwater dripped from coats and hats, but no one cared. All eyes were fixed on the inside of the coffin. There lay Carol. Her body had not moved. Her face was pale. Her eyes were closed. For a moment, nothing happened. The storm seemed far away now. The sky above was still gray, but no more thunder came. Everything held still. Then, something changed. The director leaned closer. He looked carefully at her hands. One of her fingers twitched. It was small, almost nothing, but it moved. Her chest gave a faint rise. A tiny breath slipped from her lips. The people above could not believe what they were seeing. their faces filled with shock and confusion. Some gasped again, some froze, unsure if their eyes were playing tricks. But the movement was real. Carol was not still anymore. Something inside her had started again. The silence that followed was heavier than before. No one spoke. They just watched. Something had changed. Something had happened that no one could explain. Carol's hand moved again. This time, it was more than a twitch. Her fingers shifted slightly, brushing against the inside of the coffin. Her chest rose a little, slow and shaky. Another small breath escaped her lips. The air around the grave seemed to freeze. No one spoke. No one moved. The funeral director, still standing over the open coffin, stepped back in disbelief. People gathered around the edge of the grave. Some covered their mouths. Others leaned forward, their eyes wide and filled with shock. A few took slow steps backward. The silence was broken by soft gasps and whispers that spread through the group like a ripple on water. Carol's eyelids fluttered. Her face, pale and still cold, began to show signs of life. Her lips moved slightly. Her head shifted just a little. Her eyes opened slowly. They did not focus right away. They stared upward, cloudy and confused. But they were open. She was breathing. She was alive. Gina stood closest to the grave. Her body trembled as she stared down at her granddaughter. Her face was wet with rain and tears. For a long moment, she did not move. Then her hands lifted to her mouth. Her knees weakened, but she stayed standing. Her eyes did not leave Carol's face. She looked like someone who had just seen something too big to understand. Someone in the crowd cried out. Another person dropped the umbrella they were holding. People around the cemetery began to react. Some screamed. Others wept. Many simply stood in place, too stunned to do anything else. A few people dropped to their knees, overcome by what they were witnessing. A man near the back of the crowd pulled out his phone. His hands shook as he tried to call for help. His voice was unsteady. He looked around, as if trying to make sure this was real. The wind picked up again, rustling the trees and blowing raindrops across the open field. But no one cared about the rain anymore. Carol's lips moved again, though no sound came out. Her fingers curled slightly. Her breathing was uneven but clear. Her chest rose and fell in slow, shallow movements. Her skin still looked cold, but color had begun to return to her cheeks. It was faint, but there. More people moved closer to the grave. Some crouched down, trying to get a better look. Others stayed back, unsure whether to believe their eyes. The entire group had come to say goodbye, but now they stood at the edge of something they could not explain. The funeral director climbed out of the grave, his face pale and his hands still shaking. He looked around at the people watching, and then back at Carol. She had not spoken, but she was clearly alive. It was something no one could prepare for. Gina stepped closer to the edge. Her body leaned forward as she looked into the open coffin. Her hand reached down, her fingers trembling. She touched Carol's hand gently. It was cold, but it moved. Carol's fingers wrapped weakly around hers. Gina's breath caught in her throat. Tears streamed down her face. Rain fell more softly now. The clouds above were still thick, but the thunder had passed. The storm had left something behind, something no one could understand. The people gathered at the cemetery were quiet again, watching closely. They could see what was happening, but none of them could explain it. Carol's eyes blinked slowly. Her head turned slightly. She looked tired, lost, and unsure, but she was alive. What had been a funeral had turned into something else. The moment felt heavy, full of fear, confusion, and something like hope. People whispered to each other. Some prayed under their breath. Others held on to their loved ones. The rain continued to fall around them, but they did not leave. They stayed to watch what had once seemed impossible unfold before their eyes. The ambulance arrived with its sirens off, but its lights still flashing. The paramedics stepped out quickly, not sure what to expect. They were told someone had come back to life. Most had never heard of such a thing. They walked carefully toward the open grave, where a crowd had gathered in silence. Two of them stepped into the grave and examined Carol. They checked her pulse, her breathing, and her eyes. Her skin was still cold, but her chest was rising and falling. Her pulse was weak but steady. One of them nodded. They brought a stretcher down and carefully lifted her out of the coffin. The crowd stepped aside as they carried her up to path. The rain had stopped now, but the ground was still muddy. The wheels of the stretcher left deep tracks as they moved toward the ambulance. Gina walked beside it, not letting go of Carol's hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. Her steps were unsteady, but she kept moving forward. She did not say a word. Her whole focus was on her granddaughter. Inside the ambulance, the paramedics covered Carol with a blanket and started checking her vitals again. Wires were connected to her chest. Her blood pressure was low, and her heart rate was slow, but everything was working. She was alive. One paramedic kept glancing at the monitor, still unsure if what he saw was real. Gina sat beside the stretcher and held Carol's hand tightly. She watched every small movement. She wiped Carol's face with a cloth someone had given her. Her eyes never looked away. She kept crying softly, not from fear anymore, but from shock and deep emotion. She had come to bury her granddaughter, but was now riding with her to the hospital. The drive felt longer than usual. The roads were wet and quiet. Trees passed by in a blur. Inside the vehicle, the only sounds were the steady beeping of the monitor and the low hum of the engine. The paramedics stayed focused. One kept adjusting Carol's oxygen mask. The other kept writing notes and checking her vitals. When they reached the hospital, nurses were already waiting outside. The doors swung open, and the stretcher rolled in quickly. Gina followed close behind. Her clothes were soaked, and her shoes were muddy, but no one stopped her. The doctors took over. They moved Carol to a room and began testing her right away. They checked her heart, lungs, brain activity, and blood levels. They used machines to scan her body. They asked Gina about what had happened, but she had no answers. She just repeated what she had seen, that Carol had woken up during her own funeral. The doctors looked at her with disbelief, but they did not argue. The machines showed that Carol was alive, and that was enough for now. The tests went on for hours. Nurses came and went. More doctors arrived to take a closer look. Everyone was careful, respectful, and confused. No one could explain how someone with no heartbeat today before was now breathing again. Her heart showed signs of a recent shock, but it was beating on its own. Her brain activity was normal, though she had not yet spoken. Gina stayed by her side the whole time. She refused to leave the room. Someone brought her a chair, and she sat quietly, watching Carol sleep. Her hand stayed wrapped around her granddaughter's. She still looked tired and shaken, but also deeply grateful. Later, one doctor said there was no medical reason for what had happened. There were no signs of damage. Carol's body showed that something had shut down and then restarted, but they could not say why or how. Some called it rare. Others said it was beyond their understanding. No one wanted to give a full answer. They only said one thing for certain. Carol had come back, and now she was resting. Her heart was beating. Her lungs were working. She was alive, and that was all they knew. The story of what happened at the cemetery spread through the village faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, everyone had heard that Carol was alive. People whispered about it in the market, in front of the bakery, and at the gas station. Some believed it right away. Others thought it was just a rumor, but the news kept spreading. The story did not go away. Some people said it was a miracle. Others said it was impossible. A few were afraid, thinking something strange had happened that no one could explain. Many were simply shocked. They had seen Carol's body being taken away. They had been at the funeral. They had seen the lightning strike. Now they were hearing she had come back. The cemetery workers confirmed what they had seen. So did the funeral director. He told people that the coffin had been opened and that Carol was breathing. A few of the mourners described how her hand had moved and how her eyes had opened. They spoke with serious faces and quiet voices. There was no laughter in their words, only truth. Gina stayed at the hospital. She told no one much, but her face said everything. Her eyes were tired, but full of something deeper. She sat by Carol's bed every day. She watched every small movement. She helped feed her. She brushed her hair. She cried often, but not because of pain, because of relief. Max was brought home by a neighbor. At first, he refused to eat or rest. He sat by the door and stared outside. He waited. His ears twitched at every sound. Then, when he heard Gina's voice over the phone, he began to wag his tail. He knew she was safe. People who had once thought Max was just acting wild now looked at him differently. They said he had known something was wrong. They said he had tried to warn them. Some villagers began leaving flowers at Carol's front gate. Others stopped by to ask if they could help with her farm. A few strangers from nearby towns came to see the house of the woman who came back to life. People stood on the dirt road outside her home and pointed at the field she used to work. Newspapers from other towns tried to call the hospital. A few reporters showed up at the cemetery, asking questions. They wanted to know about the lightning, about the storm, and about the moment the coffin was opened. But most people said very little. They had seen it with their own eyes, but they still could not believe it. The truth was hard to explain. At the hospital, doctors ran more tests. They kept looking for answers, but they found none. Carol was alive, but her body showed no clear reason for why or how. Her heart had restarted. Her breathing was normal. Her brain activity was healthy. The only thing they could agree on was that her recovery was real, but unexplainable. Gina often sat in silence, thinking about what had happened. She remembered how close they had come to burying Carol. If the lightning had not struck, if Max had not barked, if someone had not listened, everything could have ended differently. The thought stayed with her day and night. Carol's strength slowly returned. Her hands became steadier. She could sit up with help, then later without it. Nurses spoke gently to her, guiding her through small movements and basic steps. Each sign of improvement brought more quiet emotion to the room. Gina watched all of it with care, thankful for every breath Carol took. Carol's body healed faster than expected, but something in her seemed different. She moved slowly, as if her senses were adjusting. She blinked more often, and she sometimes looked around the room like everything was new. She didn't speak much at first. She needed time. Her mind was still clearing, like mist lifting from a quiet field. As she recovered, more people came to visit. Friends brought food, flowers, and cards. Most came not just out of kindness, but also out of wonder. They stood at the doorway, unsure what to say. Some cried when they saw her. Others just held her hand. Everyone said they were glad she was alive. They meant it deeply. Max was brought to the hospital's back garden one day. When Carol saw him, her eyes filled with tears. He barked softly, wagged his tail, and moved in circles. Nurses watched from the windows, smiling. He had waited for her. He had never given up. In the village, people still talk about the event every day. Some called it a miracle. Others tried to explain it in scientific ways. A few were scared, unsure what it all meant. Some began to go to church more often. Others walked by Carol's house in silence. The story had touched everyone. It made people question what they thought they knew about life and death. Gina thought about it all the time. At night, she sat by Carol's hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the moment the lightning struck. She thought about Max's barking, the tapping sound, and the way Carol's eyes had opened. The memory stayed with her like a heavy dream. She felt grateful but shaken. She understood how close they had come to losing Carol forever. The coffin had been ready. The ground had been dug. But something had stopped it. Something had brought her back. People began calling Max a hero. Children left little treats by the gate where he used to sit. A few shops gave him food for free. His picture was printed in a local newspaper. He was no longer just a loyal dog. He was the one who knew, the one who warned everyone. Carol's recovery continued slowly. She was not yet ready to return home, but the doctor said she was healing well. Each step forward felt like a quiet victory. The village waited, hoping for the day she would come back and walk among them again. Her return had already changed everything. The story of her funeral had become something people would tell for years. It was more than just a strange event. It was a reminder of how fragile life is, and how sometimes it does not end where we think it does.